Got a few companies left here to explore and try to get those done today or tomorrow. Give you guys a little bit of a chance, maybe. Hopefully, you've been working on your papers and listening to some of the other um, little videos that I've done. But hopefully, if you've missed something or if I hit something that you don't have in your paper, it gives you an opportunity to get in and kind of revise that. So, one that I looked at now is. Sherwin Williams. And it's kind of a fascinating company, and I'll show you why to begin with, and a interesting company in terms of possible investments. So let's let it let Morningstar bring it up so we can take a look at it. And first, let's look at just the raw numbers. So. I always kind of like to start there and take a look, see how things are going. But from 2011 to 2015, sales have gone from about 8.8 billion to 11.3 billion. So that's a nice little increase. 8 or 9% increase there, a few percent there. 10% increase there, and just a percent or two there, not a bunch in this last year. And again, when you look at these numbers here in this context, they don't necessarily jump out at you. But I'm going to come down here and we'll take a look at this one, though. And let's look at the earnings per share. Let's look at the net income available, so after tax. And here they made $442 million on 8.8 million. And here they made over $1 billion, so their income more than doubled. Okay, on sales that have gone up 25% maybe, and yet their income more than doubled. Okay, and then let's take a look here. Their earnings per share went from $4.22 to $11.38. That's almost tripling. That's not quite, but that's almost tripling on revenue that only went up 25 or 30 cents. And this is this is kind of the heart of financial management, and going, wow, what happened? What did they do? A nice sales increase is one thing, right? But when you can all of a sudden make that sales increase compound that sales increase with something else that makes your earnings go up far more rapidly, that's impressive, and that's a lot of fun and exciting. And let's take a look at one of the reasons. One of the reasons the earnings per share went up far more than even the net income. You'd think these two would be pretty similar, right? Yeah, it's a little over 2 times, right? And this is nearly 3 times. But the difference is the number of shares has decreased. Okay, so we've gone from 103 million shares outstanding to 92 million shares outstanding. So they bought back 10 million shares. That's a 10% change, right? And would increase this an additional 10% over just their earnings. So that's a big part of it. Okay. Now, what made that explains the difference between the earnings per share actually and the net income. It should, or at least come pretty close. Okay. So what then explains the difference between this? In fact, I should get my calculator out and do the math. 11,339. Actually, it's billion minus 8766 divided by. That's about a 30% increase in sales over that 5-year period. 30% increase over 5 years, so whatever, 6% a year, somewhere in that neighborhood, right? Compounded, it'd be a little less than that, 5% per year. Okay, but what made the profit then go up? 100 and some percent. Let's take a look. Let's click on the percent here. Okay. Revenue, this changes things to 100%. But look at the cost of revenue from 57% down to 51%. A 7%, not quite 7% improvement in cost of revenue, which obviously then is a 7% or thereabouts improvement in gross profit. That's just huge. At the same time, its operating expenses stayed relatively the same. It went up, just inched up a little bit, and especially in this last year, inched up here, and then they brought her back down just a little bit, meaning that its operating income then went from about 9% to about 15%, and net income then from about 5% all the way up to 9.3%. That's impressive, and that along with the reduction in shares is why you have such a huge increase in earnings per share. That's some good management. And Sherwin-Williams is one of those companies that kind of flies under the radar. You and I have heard of Sherwin-Williams, and I buy my paint there, here at the shop we have in Havre. But it's just a little go-to-hell shop that sits uptown, and you don't think much of it until you need some paint or some paint supplies or whatnot. I imagine the professionals probably use and make use of Sherwin-Williams stuff more than I do. That's paints a little bit. In fact, I'm a crappy painter. I usually leave that to my wife because she's much better at it than I am. But sometimes these under the radar stocks can just be fascinating and exciting, and this may be one of those cases. So there's stuff that you got to talk about. What has management done the last 4 or 5 years to improve those gross profit margins? Reduce the cost of goods sold. We call it cost of revenue here, but reduce the cost of goods sold. Okay, what have they done? How have they done that? Okay, and then two, talk about. This buying back shares is buying back shares, but you might talk about how they discuss that in their plan. Is that something that they plan to continue doing, et cetera, et cetera? It's pretty impressive that they're able to accomplish both of those. Now, that said, there's some other interesting things though that I had to take a look at with Sherwin-Williams, and to do that, I had to look at the balance sheet. Oops, I'm going to have to flip this, I think, to the dollar signs in this case. It's a little easier to take a look at. But we got some kind of weird things. They do some oddball things here with their cash and equivalents. Look at that. They went from 33, I'm presuming 33 million, all of a sudden up to 873 million, drained off a little bit. That probably wouldn't be, any big surprise, but then back down to 41 million. Wow. And then up to 206 million. So what's going on with their cash? I'm intrigued, and part of that intrigue stems from, I got to come down here and find where I'm looking. Look at their total stockholders' equity. 1.5 billion, 1.8 billion, 1.8 billion. So all of a sudden, then it jumps, or it decreases to less than $1 billion. So their stockholders' equity fell in half. Now, part of that, and a big part of that, was buyback of stock. That's what this treasury stock is. Okay, so the company has, and we saw that in the other report, right? They've steadfastly here for the last 3 or 4 or 5 years been buying back stock. It's probably gotten more expensive too per share because the stock's gone up in price, would be my guess. Okay, and their long-term liabilities actually decreased. They decreased their debt here, and yet they had pretty good cash, and then their cash went way down here, and then here in 2015 their long-term debt soared by about 800 million. Okay, and I'll confess that just glancing at this, I'm not sure what's happened there. Here I'm guessing that from this change here, 1.1 billion to 1.9 billion, was all about this. The treasury stock going from 3.2 billion to 4.2 billion. That means they bought back $1 billion worth of stock, it looks like. Okay, which would lower their equity, except that they also increase their retained earnings by about 800 million, and then they've got some additional paid-in capital. Not sure where that would have come from, but you need to take a look. Okay, so So if I'm doing Sherwin Williams, I'm spending a lot of time. I'm probably saving that for the end, the really good stuff, because that's going to probably lead into my recommendation, I'm assuming. Okay, and so I'm going to save that for the end. I'm going to talk about this a little bit, and I had one of the students come in and we talked about Wendy's, and this was not dissimilar to Wendy's. It had some kind of weird things. It had some really wonderful things going on, and it had some weird things going on here in the finance. I don't know if I looked at their short-term debt either, but their short-term debt jumped, almost opposite of their cash. So here their cash is 863 and they've got no short-term debt. All of a sudden they got short-term debt, their cash goes down. They got more short-term debt and they got zero cash. And now all of a sudden they got no short-term debt, but they got long-term debt. Okay, and so they've been messing around a little, not messing around, and I certainly don't mean to make that. I don't want that to sound poor at all, but they've been doing some financial managing there with their debt. Maybe trying to figure out where they want to go with their debt a little bit, what they want to finance, what they are financing, buying back. It wouldn't surprise me that we're seeing some of these companies lock in some long-term debt because rates are so low right now. Rates are as low as they're going to be. You got companies like this one that appear to be really, really solid. If we can borrow money at 3% and buy back our stock, and we're growing at 6 or 7 or 8%, doing some other good things, that's maybe as good a place to invest our money as any, and that might be what they talk about. Okay, and so we got to dig into the financial, into the balance sheet in addition to the income statement and talk about this. I'm gonna pause for a bit because I want to show you one thing, because we did this with the Wendy's one. The student came in and talked to me.